Alright, so today we're going to work on our foundation plan. So some of the things that we need to figure out with our foundation plan is where our column pads are going to be. So we talked a little bit about how we pour concrete column pads to support the columns instead of just putting those on the slab. And in order for us to figure out where we're going to put the column pads, we have to figure out where we're going to put the columns. And the columns are going to support the beams, so we need to figure out where the beams are going to be. So to figure out the beams, we have to find out where our joists are going to run and where they need support. So the longest point of our building, the longest span, and whenever we talk about how long a joist spans, we're really talking about the distance that it supports the floor and it doesn't have any support underneath it. So right now our span would be from that point to that point. So that ends up being about 29 feet long. We could find a joist that would span 29 feet. The problem that you're going to have with it is you're going to end up having a bouncy joist. That's a very long span to have in a residential situation. You'd have to have a very tall joist that probably end up being 16 inches high. You'd have to space it at 12 inches on center. You'd spend a lot of money on the floor. So what we're going to do, more likely than not, is have a beam that will go down somewhere near the center of this joist. So I'm going to do the beam in red, and what I want to kind of look at is I'm not going to put the beam right through the stairs here. Obviously I can't have a beam through the stairs. I'm not going to put it on this side because then I would have a beam right there. So what I'm going to look at doing is lining the beam up with the stairs, and I'll just carry that through the whole way. Now I have a beam in place and I know where I can run my joists. So my joists the whole way across are going to run this direction. And then down here they're going to run this direction. So if this is 29 feet, this distance across, we're probably looking at about 16, 17, 18 feet, but you could actually do and you actually should do the measurement from this point to this point to find out how big of a joist that you actually need to use, what the spacing is going to be. So after you do that, you can choose your joist. What you have to keep in mind is now that you have a support at this point and a support at this point, as well as a support at that point, I just created a new span. And they always use the letter L to signify the span. And this is going to be a multi-span joist instead of a simple span joist. So whenever we look at our printout of our joist selection, we can all of a sudden start looking at, get it narrowed down to using a multiple span. So the next thing I would want to do is get my joist selection guide out and find out a measurement. So after we went through and measured, we found out that the new span that we have, the distance that the joist is unsupported, is 15 feet 7 inches. So what we can do now is go into our joist selection sheet. These are Louisiana Pacific wood eye joists, and there's quite a few to choose from, but the one that we chose is for 23 30-seconds OSB sheathing. That's how thick the subfloor is going to be. And we also chose to use the specified floor loads of 40 PSF live load and 15 PSF dead load, and those are pretty substantial loads, so we're definitely going to be good enough as far as picking out something that can handle any floor that we put in there. We could have a pool table in there, large bathtubs, things of that nature. So the first thing that we want to do with this chart is we want to figure out which one we're going to use. So the first two options that we really have to look at is up here, OSB sheething nailed only, and then OSB sheathing glued and nailed. So the big difference between the two obviously is one is glued and one is nailed, but whenever we glue the subfloor to the joist, it becomes one solid sheet instead of a bunch of individual sheets. So we're going to go ahead and glue our flooring to the joist. Alright, once we've narrowed it down to this situation right here where we're going to glue it, now the next thing that we have to do is we have to decide whether we're going to no direct attach ceiling or direct attach ceiling, 1/2 inch gypsum ceiling. And the big difference is, if I'm going to attach drywall directly to the underside of the joist, they only have the ability to deflect or bend a certain amount. Because what happens is if they start bending too much, then it's going to crack the drywall. In the other situation over here, the no direct attached ceiling, they're really talking about a drop ceiling or an acoustical ceiling grid where the joists aren't connected directly to the ceiling. So we are going to use the worst case scenario. We're going to imagine that if the people that we're designing this for ever want to put in a drywall ceiling in their basement. So now all of a sudden we can start looking at this chart right here. So we're getting narrowed down, and then the next thing that we have to look at is maximum simple span or maximum continuous span. And the difference between those two is the continuous span is going to have a support in the middle, and the simple span is only going to have a support at the ends. So now all of a sudden we can look at the section on the right. The next thing that we have to look at is our spacing. So we have 4 different spacing options. We have 12 inches on center, 16, 19.2, and 24. 12 is going to make us spend a lot of money on joists. We're going to have a lot of joists, and we could use that, but we're going to try to avoid it. 24, in my opinion, is just too far, spaced too far apart, and we're going to try to avoid that. So now we are narrowed down to the multi-span category. So the next thing that we're going to do is narrow it down from multi-span. We're going to eliminate the 12-inch on center and the 24-inch on center, and we're going to look at the Joist Series. So the Joist Series that we're looking at right now is LPI 18, and basically what happens is as we go further down the list, the joists become more expensive. So we started with a 11/7/8 inch high joist earlier in our project as a starting point. So we're going to look at that joist first. You could also go to a 16-inch or a 9.5 inch in that series. So whenever we come over to our category, the multi-span 16-inch or 19.2 inch, what we can see is the 19.2 inch can still span 17 feet 2 inches, which is quite a bit more than what we need it to do, so we're going to end up choosing that joist. So the actual joist that we'd be choosing and specifying on the drawing would be a 11 7/8 inch LPI 18 spaced at 19.2 inches on center. We are not going to list the span on there because it's not important information for the contractor. So now that we have the span figured out, we have a joist selected, we can go through, we can add that to the drawing. Probably want to make note of that in your drawing as soon as you know it so that you have the information and you don't have to look it up again. I'm just going to write it on this sketch for now.